We begin the current Daf, Mesechtes Nedarim Daf Lamed Ches. We begin 5 lines Daf at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara introduces a few different Agadic teachings. First one is going to relate back to a pasuk we mentioned in Daf Lamed Zayin regarding Moshe Rabbeinu and the giving of the Torah. Shares corresponds to Pasuk and Cheskel to Davar Hashem joining for today's Daf. Something we discuss in today's Daf. Once we get back to the next Mishnah on the bottom of the Yomid, back to the halachas of the topic of the parak of Im Ben Hamudr, of the Isser of Hana, of the Neder, regarding that a person is allowed to feed the Mudr's wife and his children, even though that father, that husband is obligated in the Mezainis, still, that's not considered prohibited in the way of giving him Hana. But the Mudr is allowed to marry the Mother's daughter, and the Gemara discuss exactly the parameters of that case. Zonas Tameya, the Gemara has a machlekes regarding if the mudder may feed the mother's non-kosher animals, is that considered benefiting him or not by giving him a lot of food? But everyone agrees in the Zanis Atayim, the mudder may not feed the mother's kosher animals because the mother may not give the mudder's kosher animals because that would be benefiting him. But he's allowed to go ahead and feed his slaves. Again, that's considered not a real benefit. And the Gemara concludes regarding Hamad the Benoy Talmud Torah, a father makes a neder to prohibit benefiting from his son, because he wants the son not to be disturbed in the Torah regarding certain things that still the son's allowed to do for the father. To begin the current Daf Lamed Ches, 5 lines Daf at the top of the Yomid. So Omer Reb Chama Bar Chanina says, Leheshem Moshe Ben did not become wealthy, Elam Ipseilosan Shaluchas, but from the broken pieces of the Luchas. We know Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchas. The broken pieces is what actually made him wealthy. Something like it says in the pasuk in Shemais, which you quoted on the previous Daf. That's why the Gemara is bringing it over here. Carve out for you 2 tablets of stone like the earlier ones. What does it mean? Psalacha, pseilasan, the broken pieces, shalcha shall be yours. Like the Rosh says, as the Medrash tells us elsewhere, that the luchos were made out of sampirinin. It was made out of sapphire, very expensive gem, and therefore he became wealthy from the broken pieces of the luchos. Similarly, based on the same drasha of psalacha, the Gemara compares it to another idea. Amar B'Yisrael Chanina says, "Le'nitner Torah ela Moshe Lazar." The Torah was only given to Moshe and his descendants. Shemlik says the pasuk in Shemais. Ksav l'cha. Hashem tells him, write for yourself the Torah. Now we also have the other pasuk of Psal l'cha, which was you get the broken pieces of the luchas. So ma psal l'cha shalcha. Just when it says Psal l'cha means say the broken piece was for you. Of kisav and shalcha. So too the writing of the Torah, Ksav l'cha means it's for you. But although the Torah is really given to Moshe and his descendants, Moshe Nogbot Toibas Ayin. Moshe Rabbeinu conducted himself with very generous eye. The Nasl Yisrael, and he gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Allah around him, the Pasuk says in Mishlei, that Toiv Ayin Hu Yevarech. Someone with a good eye, someone who's generous, he's going to be the one who blesses, etc. Where the Pasuk there concludes, Ki Nosin Melach Meladol, because he gives him his bread to the poor. This was really Moshe Rabbeinu's bread, so to speak, and he gave it to the poor Jewish people. That was because of his generosity of spirit. But the problem is, the Gemara says this seems to be contradicted from a few places. Mas Rav Chizda, the pasuk says in the Varim that, and this was the pasuk we brought from the previous Daf also, but and me says Moshe Ben Hashem commanded me at that time to teach you. So you see, Hashem commanded him to teach it to the Jewish people. Wasn't that out of his own generosity? That the Gemara answers, no, you have to read the pasuk like this. There has to be a comma. V'oisi tziva Hashem be'esahi, period. Hashem commanded me the Torah. V'ani lachem, and I decided to go ahead and give it to you. So it's v'oisi tziva Hashem be'esahi, and then I, out of my goodness of my heart, I went and l'lamed eschem, I went and taught you the chukim u'mishpatim. The Gemara asks from another pasuk. It says the pasuk in the Varim, look, I have taught you the statutes and the judgments. Like Hashem, my God commanded me. So you see, Hashem commanded him to teach the Torah. Says the Gemara, no, here you also have to read it. Oisi tziva, v'ani lachem. So you read the pasuk. I taught it to you, comma. Like Hashem commanded it to me, but Hashem didn't command me to teach you. That was out of my generosity. The Gemara asks him another pasuk in the Varim. Pasuk says, Moshe Rabbeinu tells Klal Yisrael, "Vata now kisvu lachem as ashira azois." Write for yourself this song, and the pasuk concludes, "V'lamda es bnei Yisrael," and teach it to the Jewish people. So this pasuk seems to indicate that this shira, the Torah, which is called the shira, has to be taught to the Jewish people. Where this is Hashem telling to Moshe Rabbeinu, write for yourself at the shira zois v'lamdas b'nei Yisrael sim b'fiyim. So you see that it's supposed to be taught to Klal Yisrael. So that says the Gemara, no, Hashira Luchuda. This is referring to the Shiras Hazinu. Only that was supposed to be given over to the Jewish people, but not the whole Torah. The Gemara says, but wait a second. The pasuk says over there, Lamanti li Hashira Hazais la'ed b'bnei Yisrael, so that this song should be for me as a testimony in the Jewish people. If you tell me it only refers to the Shir of Al-Yasher, what type of testimony? I mean, if it's the whole Torah, the Torah tells all the warnings, all the obligations, all the mitzvahs, so that's testimony against the Jewish people. But if it's just the Shir Hazinu, well, that's just a song of all the greatness Hashem did for us. How could that be an 8? So the Gemara falls off from what it had originally said, that the whole Torah was given to Moshe and he gave it out of his good spirit to the Jewish people. No, that was, of course, given to the whole Jewish people. Ella pilpula be'alma. Pilpul, which the Rush explains, is the understanding and the sharpness. And that's what, when the Gemara said, the ksav l'cha, the ksav is yours, he explains all the wisdom and all the intelligence are alluded to in the words of the Torah, in the form of the letters. You know that the Vilna Gaon, after learning everything, he came back to just the actual Sefer Torah, and then everything's in the letters itself. All the wisdom is in the Aleph Beis, in the Ksav. And that pilpul, Hashem gave to Moshe, and he was generous, and he gave that to the Jewish people. That's what it refers to when we say that the Torah Ksav is L'cha, the actual writing is for Moshe Ben. Now, continue on it relates back to a pasuk that we mentioned before. Amr Rabbi Yechanan. It says, "In HaKadosh Baruch Hu Masha Shechinaseh, Hashem does not rest His divine presence. Ila Gibor, someone that's strong, v'asher wealthy, v'chacham and wise, v'anav and humble. And v'kulam Moshe, we find them all by Moshe Rabbeinu. Gibor, where do you find he was strong? Because it says the pasuk in Shmais. The Yifrit says Oil on Mishkan. He spread out the oil, which is referring to those sheets that went on top of the Mishkan. Now, Vamamar, the master says Moshe Rabbeinu, the person, Moshe Rabbeinu himself spread it over. Now, the pasuk says in Shmais, the height of the Mishkan was 10 amas. It's very tall. Now, obviously, Moshe Rabbeinu was very tall. He was 10 amas tall, because or else how could he have spread the Yeriyos over the Mishkan? Now, the Ran says, since he must have been so tall, we could presume that he was very strong. We usually have very tall people that are very strong. Says the Gemara, how do you know that? Maybe he was very tall in his height, but cotton. Maybe he was very thin in his strength. So how could you see that he was strong? And the rather says the Gemara, no, min hadinkra, from a different pasuk. So like it says the pasuk in Devarim. It says the etveis b'shnei haluches. Moshe Rabbeinu says that I grabbed onto the 2 luches. V'shlichim al shtei yoda. He's telling over the story how he broke the luches, and I threw them out from my 2 hands. V'ashab, and I broke them. Now we're trying to learn the brayse haluches. The tablets, arkan shisha, their length was 6 tvachim. Berachman shisha, their width was 6 tvachim. The avian shleisha, and the thickness was 3 tvachim. Now, he had to throw it down to the ground with a lot of strength and to break it, and from the fact that he did, must have been that he was strong. That's how we know that he was a Gibor. I know this Asher, and this is why we brought in this teaching, because it relates back to the teaching we started off to Amid with from the previous Daf. Psalachad said, what does that mean? Psalas shalcha yehe, which again was the broken piece of the luchas, which was a sapphire gem, and that's how he became wealthy. Chacham, how do we know he was wise? Rabbi Shmuel, Mishum Shari Bin and Nivra Bailam. There's 50 gates of understanding that was created in the world. All of the gates were given to Moshe Rabbeinu, except for one, which is understanding Hashem on His truth, meaning all the way to understand God. Like it says the pasuk in Tehillim. But the Chasrei Ma'at, you diminished him a little bit, like him, meaning the way the Ran explains it, from understanding God fully, that he wasn't able to. No one really understands all the way who God is. Anav, where do we find that he was humble? Looks like it says a pasuk in the Midbar. It's an explicit pasuk. Vish Moshe on the Ma'id. Moshe Rabbeinu was exceedingly humble. Now, so we find all these 4 characteristics by Moshe. Amr B'Yechan says, Kol Neviim, all the prophets Hashinim Hayu, they were all wealthy. Not only do we know this, we know it from Moshe Rabbeinu, Shmuel Hanavi, Amos Hanavi, Yoina Hanavi. Moshe says in Bamidbar, Lo Chamor Echem Mem Nasasi. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I have not ridden on any one of their donkeys. Now the question is like this: Ibaloy Agra, if he didn't pay the rental for someone else's donkey amongst Klal Yisrael, Lafuki Man the Shakab Igra is coming to exclude from someone who takes it without paying the rent. Like that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is praising himself, that he didn't take it without paying the rent for taking someone else's donkey. Ela rather no dafila be'agra, meaning even with paying the rent, he didn't need to benefit from others because he was very wealthy. That's what he was priding himself on. Says, how do you know? Maybe the reason why he didn't rent anyone's donkey was not because he was wealthy, but because actually Mishum Da'ani Hava. He was actually poor, couldn't afford to rent for someone else. Now the rather says the Gemara, min p'salacha. Again, it's from that pasuk before that we mentioned, so lost in Yeheshalcha, the broken pieces of the luchas was Moshe. That's how we know he was wealthy. The Gemara says, Shmuel, how do we know that he was wealthy? That's like it says the pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. It says, Hineni, here I am. Anu bi neged Hashem and neged Mashiach. This towards the end of his life. It says, answer to me, opposite Hashem and opposite his anointed one. Ashur mi lekachti, whose ox did I take? Chamer mi lekachti, whose donkey did I take? So again, the Gemara says a similar idea. If he's told me that he took it without paying, he's coming to take food from like someone who takes that, so he's priding himself. I didn't snatch away someone's donkey. No, rather, even with paying for it, he says, I didn't take anyone's because I was very wealthy. I didn't have to. Says maybe because he was poor, he couldn't afford to rent someone's donkey. The Gemara says, you're right. From a different passage in Shmuel Aleph. Said, and he went back to Ramot, Kisham Beisai, because that was where his house was. What does that mean? So V'amar Rabbi says, wherever he went, Beisai Imoy, his house was with him. So Sham Beisai is on his way back. He had his house because he was so wealthy that he was always able to travel in style, and he always had what he needed. So that's how you see he's wealthy. Now, parenthetically, we mentioned Moshe and Shmuel. So Amar Rabbi says, it's greater what it says regarding Shmuel Hanabi and what it says regarding Moshe Rabbeinu. Because the Ilma Moshe Rabbeinu said by Moshe Rabbeinu it says, I didn't ride any one of the donkeys, Dafil B'schar, even by paying. But it sounds like forcing them. Like, here, give me a donkey and I'll pay for you. But even willingly of the owners, he didn't rent it, because as the Ran explains, sometimes they'll be okay with it because they're embarrassed, not because they really want to. The Rebbe asked them for like the donkey, so I'm going to say no. So by Shmuel was even if they were willing, he didn't go ahead and take it. Like it says the pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. Remember they said no, lo yashaktanu, you didn't go ahead and extort it from us. But we didn't even, not even when we wanted. Meaning, even when they wanted, Shmuel didn't take. In contrast, you don't see that lashon by Moshe Rabbeinu. That's greater wording that's said by Shmuel than says by Moshe Rabbeinu. Even when they wanted to, he didn't take. Now, going on to the next two in Nevi'im, that how do we know they were wealthy? Amos Tachsiv, it says a pasuk in Sefer Amos. V'yan Amos v'yeme el Amatzia. He said to Amatzia, "Lo navi neichi, v'lo ben navi neichi." Famous phrase. I'm not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. Ki boiker neichi. The simple translation sounds like that I'm a shepherd of cattle. Uvoiles shikmim, and he checks out the sycamore trees. But the Gemara explains it's Kedim of Yosef. Yosef in the Aramaic translation explains the real understanding of the pasuk. I'm the master of this cattle. And I have all these sycamore trees that are mine in the valley. So you see that he must have been a wealthy person with as a landowner and of cattle. How do we know Yoina Hanavi? We learned this by Yom Kippurim. Mafta Yoina, right? Yoina, how do we know he's wealthy? And maybe this is why the guy for große Geld in Mafta Yoina. Yoina is given a gvir, and it says that in the Mafta Yoina. Like it says in the pasuk, it says that he gave the wages for the boat ride that he was ultimately thrown off and into the whale. But he went into it. But he says, he paid the trip of the entire boat ride. Meaning he didn't just pay for his fare, he paid for the whole entire boat, what it costed. It's a real gvir. So if you get Mafta Yoina, it has to be like this type. He says, maybe you can figure out what today the value would be. It says that the price of the boat, was 4,000 golden dinarim. And again, Yoina paid for the whole thing. And that's how we know that he was a gvir, that he was an ashur. Now the Gemara concludes, just in the related vein, talking about the Torah given to Moshe Rabbeinu. This is B'tchilin, beginning Moshe Rabbeinu would learn the Torah and he would forget it. It was given to him as a gift. So like it says the pasuk in Shmos, Moshe was given to Moshe. When he finished speaking with him, you see there was yitain, it was a gift, because when it comes to Torah, it's not our own intelligence that gets the Torah, it's a gift that Hashem gives us. Now going back to the topic of the previous Mishnayos, continuing on the theme of Hamudunah Hana Mechavere. Someone takes a vow prohibiting his friend from Hana, so the Mishnah tells us, continues the theme of what's still permitted, even though it's a Mudah Hana. The halacha is V'zanis Ishtay Bezbanav. You're allowed to feed the Mudah's wife and kids, as the Ram points out, even according to the Abanan, which we said that they were more strict about, let's say, paying up his creditors and those types of things. Because the Ran explains here, there's two gersois. Either it's like you're doing a mitzvah or you're doing a matana. You're not really paying up the creditor of this guy. If you paid up his debt, the Rabban hold that's considered giving him a no, that's forbidden. Here, when you're giving the kids, I'm not because I want to take care of your obligations, because you can look nebuchah starving. So I'm giving them as a mitzvah of tzedakah or as a matana, but nothing to do with you, even though you're getting some type of secondary benefit. And that's like the Mishnah says, even though the father, the husband is obligated in feeding them, and even though ultimately the mud is going to have benefit where he doesn't have to feed them, but says the Ran, that is considered hanod dimamela. It's a secondary benefit. That's not my primary thing that I'm doing. That would not be forbidden to do for the mud hana, even according to Rabban. Then the Mishnah continues and says that but you're not allowed to feed his animal. It's machlokes which animals. Tanakama says bein tameya bein tahira. Whether the kosher animal or the non-kosher animal, ultimately you're directly benefiting him because the value of the animal is going up. When you give the animal all this food, the fat of the animal, the more money it's going to fetch. So therefore, you can't feed his animal. But Rabbi Eliezer, he says, no, you could feed his non-kosher animal, as we're going to explain further, because since the mudr does not get any benefit of eating, because it's a non-kosher animal, he doesn't really benefit from the mezainis that the mudr is giving to his animal. But he agrees, Rabbi Eliezer, yeah, you cannot feed the kosher animal because the fatter the cow gets, the more value it's going to have, and you're directly benefiting the mudr. Twitch. Oh, so we'll see. It's exactly what the Ran's going to bavar. Yeah, good point. Amrulai, so they said to Rabbi Eliezer, wait a second, ma bein tamei l'tayra. What's the difference between that of a tamei, a non-kosher animal, and a kosher animal? Amrulai says, I'll tell you very simple. Shatar, when it comes to a kosher animal, nafsha l'shamayim. Its soul goes to Shamayim, meaning you don't have any benefit from its soul. But beguf shaloi, the body is his, meaning he could eat it, and therefore, even fattening it up, you're benefiting him. Whereas with Tameya, regarding a non-kosher animal, as we continue to base, nafsha begufa l'shamayim, its soul and its body is for Shamayim, meaning he doesn't have any permissibility of eating it. So it comes out you're not really benefiting him by fattening it up. Which Amrulai, they said to him, no, it's not true. Afa Tameya, also the non-kosher animal, nafsha l'shamayim begufa shaloi. The body is his. What does that mean? You can't eat a non-kosher animal. Why are you benefiting when he's fattening up the animal? Because if he wants to, then you could sell it to a non-Jew who's going to eat it, and when it's fatted, he's going to pay for it more. Or he's going to give it to the dogs. Comes that he benefits from it being fattened up and of it having more flesh, more muscle. Now the Ram points out, someone just asked, it appears to me, says the Ram, that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't permit the mother to fatten up the non-kosher animal only to give it excess food, to fatten it up, because he holds, since it's not going to be used by the mudr of eating it just for work, because you can't eat a non-kosher animal, so the owner is not benefiting when it gets fattened, because to get the contrary, when the animal gets fattened up, it becomes more delicate and it doesn't work so hard. You need a strong, lean animal. But when it's the food that it needs to survive, the basic food, no, says the Ran, that Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't permit, because that for sure is benefiting the owner. Now, it's just because the Tanakama said, blanket statement, you're not allowed to feed his animal, whether kosher or not kosher, which sounds like in all situations it's forbidden by a kosher animal. So too, he said all situations forbidden by a non-kosher animal. So Rabbi Eliezer responded, no, there is a case that you're allowed to feed the non-kosher animal, even though you're not allowed to feed the kosher animal. Now, although the Tana is unspecific in his wording, he relies on what was Amrulai and what Rabbi Eliezer responded back, because from the Shak of Ataria, it's obvious that Rabbi Eliezer didn't permit by a non-kosher animal only with excess food to fatten it up and not the amount of what it needs to survive. Because that, of course, Rabbi Eliezer would agree that that's benefiting him. He doesn't have to pay for the food. That's not what we're talking about. The extra food, which fattens it up. Since you're not going to benefit from that because it's a non-kosher animal, therefore Rabbi Eliezer says mutter. Again, the Tanakama says no, it's asur, because what do you mean? You could sell it to a guy or you could give it to a dog. Now, relating to the opening halacha of the Mishnah had said that he's allowed to go ahead and feed his wife and kids. Now, related to this halacha, the Gemara brings the following halacha. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chananya, Amar Rav Huna. If someone is a subject of a vow from benefiting from his friend, he's allowed to marry off to him his daughter. So the Gemara says, okay, that was what the teaching of Huna was. Bezer asked, but my skin, what exactly is the case that you tell me? As follows. If you tell me that's talking about where the assets of the father of the bride are asur in al-chasan. He saw this young whippersnapper and he says, you can't have any benefit from me. So he's the mudda, the chasan. So you're telling me that still he could go ahead and marry off his daughter to that guy that is prohibiting benefit from. Says the Gemara, how could you say that? He's giving him a maidservant to serve him, because the Gemara assumes right now that we're talking about his daughter that's a naira, that's not a full adult yet, where it's only in the father's domain to give her over who she can get married to. So the father is benefiting directly that he has some woman to clean up and make food, and that definitely is benefiting. The other brother says the Gemara, no, the other way around. We're talking about b'nechsei chasen asurin. Saying this young guy saw this el to the yid. He says, old man, you can't have any benefit from me at all. So he made it forbidden alavi kala on the father of the bride. Oh, that's the chiddush. That even though his assets are forbidden on the father of the girl, still the Rav Huna is telling us that he's allowed to marry that guy's daughter. What's the chiddush in that? Because even though now as a husband he's going to have to feed her, comes out he's benefiting the father, that he's not going to have to feed his daughter. That's the chiddush that Rav Huna was saying. That, okay, he's allowed to marry his daughter. Says the Gemara, how could that be a chiddush of Rav Huna? We said even something bigger than that in our Mishnah, which was the opening halacha. We said, Zanis ishte v'zbanav, a person who's a mother, could feed the mother's wife and children. And even though the father and the husband are obligated in feeding them, you're telling me there's allowed to marry his daughter? In other words, if he could feed the guy's daughter when she's still his daughter, when the father is obligated to feed her, for sure he can feed her after he marries her, where he gets obligated as a wife to feed her. What would be the chiddush of Rav Huna then in such a case? It's less than even what the Mishnah says. So the Gemara says, no. L'olam, the truth is, it's like we said before. We're talking about where the father of the bride, he made his assets forbidden, asurim ala chasen. They're forbidden on the groom. And then the question was, well, how could he give him over his daughter? He's giving him a shifch, he's been mahanim. No, we're talking about obabito begedes. We're talking about where his daughter's already over 12 and a half, where he's not giving her over to this man. She herself is an adult, umidaita, and it's with her consent. So he's explaining, in other words, the reason why it's permitted is because it's with her own consent, because once she's a begedes, her father has no more rights in her. Or another pshat, what is the midaita coming to say, says the Ran? Midaita is coming to exclude the das of the chasen. Meaning, if the chasen made the father-in-law a shliach to speak with his daughter to try to get her married, says the Ran, that's what midaita is coming to exclude. That would be forbidden because then he'd be benefiting him because he's convincing his daughter to marry this guy as a shliach of this item who he made an isra of hana. That's just some two pshatim. The Ran says, what is midaita? You're saying begedes, obviously it's midaita. So that's one pshat. Midaita is just explaining that yes, that because it's with her own consent, therefore it's permitted. Or another pshat, he says, another knage, is that midaita is lafuki das of the chasen. Meaning if he's giving over his daughter with her consent, not with his consent, meaning his consent would mean to say that the chasen asked the father-in-law, who's not allowed to benefit, that's on-law, do me a favor, speak to your daughter and try to convince her to get married to me. If it's midas hachasan, that would be forbidden, that would be mahanim. But if it's only midas his daughter, and then again that's permitted because he's not giving over a shivchat l'sham. His daughter's getting married on her own. Although the tata gets involved, from the halachic angle, he's not giving over anything. It's her herself who's getting married. And similar in the brayso, like Rav Huna, the way we're differentiating if she's a naira or she's a begedes. If someone took a prohibition of benefit from his friend, again, that's when she's a young girl, cannot marry off to his daughter because he's giving a shivcha to serve him. But he could marry off his daughter that's already an adult, and she's doing it on her own consent because, again, he's not considered being mahana, this item, because it's not him who's doing it, it's his daughter who's getting married on her own volition. Similarly, the Gemara tells us another thing that's considered very insignificant, and therefore it's permitted, even though there's an isser of a neder. Says the Gemara, Amr Yaakov. It says, Amadir b'nai. There's different interpretations, but we'll say it the way the Ran says it. If a father takes a neder that he's not going to benefit from his son, why not? Why is he taking isser of benefiting from his son? Because l'talmud Torah. He doesn't want the son to stop learning Torah for a second. Mama shemasmin and mesiftim bismedrash. He says, the father says, I take a neder, I can't have any hana from you. I know you always like going grocery shopping, doing all these things. I can't have benefit from you. You have to only sit and learn Torah. In spite of that, says Rabbi Yaakov, the son is still allowed to draw a barrel of water for his father, and he's allowed to go ahead and light a candle for him. And Rabbi Yitzchak says, even litzlis le'dakot, you could even roast for him a small fish, because like Duran explains, presumably something very small like these things, which is not really so much bittul Torah, from those types of things, he didn't take a neder from his son, and that a klein azach the son could do, but not obviously not a big thing. Amr b'Yirmiyah, Amr b'Yechanan. He also follows on this theme about something that's a small thing that you could do. If someone is prohibited from a vow, from benefiting from his friend, in spite of that, you're allowed to give him to drink the cup of peace. Mind you, what's this kaishal shalom? So Hachatagima here in Babel they translate it's kaishal beis aval. That's the cup in the mourner's house where they would drink some wine, as the Gemara elsewhere says in Kesubas, where they would, it's ten yain lamori nefesh. The bittered souls need to drink wine. So that cup you're allowed to give to the mudhana. The Manava in the West, and so they said it's kaishal beis amerchatz. It's the cup of the bathhouse, which they would drink to rejuvenate themselves in the hot bathhouse. Now, why is this permitted? Says the Ran, because of darchi shalom, because that was their norm, and therefore that's not considered really benefiting. It's considered just a regular way of greeting a person. But the Ran does point out that specifically if the cup was the mudder's, you're not giving him a cup of wine. It's the mudder's. You're just serving him. That's permitted. Because that's going to be similar to the case of Hamadres B'nei L'Tamatayra, where the son is allowed to go ahead and draw the water for the father, which is the father's water. He's just serving him. But to actually give him something from his own, that you can't, because that's going to be Isser of the Neder of having Hana. But just serving a slight service, so that's also says around, that's the same case over here, when we're talking about that he's giving him this cup of wine, it's the subject's cup of wine. He's just serving it to him. But to actually give him his wine, that would be prohibited, because that would be giving him Hana. Now, he said in the Mishnah, Lo yoznes behemtoi, that he shouldn't go ahead and feed his animal, bein v'chulu. So we had a machlokes in the Mishnah regarding this, that you cannot feed his animal. Is it every type, kosher and non-kosher? Whereas Rabbi Lazar said, no, a kosher animal you cannot feed of the muddas, but the non-kosher animal you could feed. The time to learn the Brisa, Yeshua ish uza omer. He says like the Chachamim, that san avodah v'shevches v'kanan, you could feed his slaves and his maidservants, the non-Jewish ones, which is no less than, let's say, his family members. Everyone said you could feed. But he cannot feed his animals, bein tameya, bein tahira, whether kosher or non-kosher. Now, the Ram points out that this that you could feed his servants, here also he says, it must be talking about excess food, which is going under Rabbi Lazar. In other words, this that Rabbi Lazar permitted to go ahead and fatten up a non-kosher animal, that is the excess food, like we explained in the Mishnah. And that is said, this Yeshua ben Yeshua is saying that no, even by a non-kosher animal which is made for fattening, you can use it to sell to a non-Jew. Therefore, that's going to be awesome. But that's what he's saying. But by avad v'shapches v'kenanim, that was saying, as the Gemara says, my time. What's the difference to differentiate between the servants and the animals? Regarding the non-Jewish servants, lemenacharusa avidan. Either the girsa is lemenacharusa avidan, the run is a slightly different girsa, which means their job is lenaker habayis, to clean out the house and to just do some light housework, or some have the girsa that lemenacharusa. In other words, that when they die, you're not going to eat them. They're just for being poked, and when they die, you just leave them, and no one eats them, and therefore there's no. Huh? But you don't make a slave to fatten them up. That's what the Ran's explaining. We're talking about this, that you're allowed to feed the servants, is going under Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar, you that say, we're disagreeing with you. You that say that you're allowed to go ahead and feed the non-kosher animals because you can't eat it anyway. What's the problem with the extra food? No, the extra food of fattening up is prohibited. Why? Because you could sell it to a guy. You can give it to a dog. And that we're saying, that halach of extra food, that I'm disagreeing with you, for that you're allowed to feed that guy's servants. Because extra food, to fatten up a slave, is a grubber, is not able to work as well. That is where you're saying that's going to be permitted to fatten it up. Because fattening up a slave is not a mila, according to everyone. Because when he dies, you're not feeding him to cannibals. You have no value of feeding him, fattening him up. Right, but saying the fatter the tummy animal is, the more meat there is to eat. For a slave, the fatter he is, the worse of a servant he is. He's not valuable. He actually becomes less valuable. He's not able to work as much. So therefore, that's the difference. And therefore, behema, on the other hand, is the fatuma vida. We make it to fatten it up. The fatter it is, the better the better the meat is, the more meat there is, and therefore that's what's going to be usher. Can't trust about. I can do it anytime. No, nothing else.